Hey, this is Helen Dawson, and you're listening to the Innovation Crowd podcast. Businesses are looking to reinvent themselves, be more digital, more sustainable, and thrive in a volatile world. Yet most corporate innovation programs don't deliver. In fact, many don't even survive after their second birthday. On this show, I sit down with the experts to discuss the strategies that work, so you don't have to learn the hard way. So come and join me in the Innovation Crowd. Welcome back to the Innovation Crowd. Today's guest is going to give us a little insight into the world of capital projects and how digital helps us do things better than we've ever been able to do them in the past. So I'd like to welcome Neill Pawsey from Cohesive. Neill, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and maybe what Cohesive Group does?
It's always a trick question. I normally get my wife to answer what I do. That's always a good one because I'm not sure she knows what I do. I think she thinks I'm a secret agent or something like that. But yeah, so I'm a very grand title, isn't it? A principal digital consultant. So I guess people pay me money for me to give them the benefit of my experience and expertise. So I help lots of clients from different asset-intensive industries, Helen, to apply new digital ways of working, I think is the best way to put it. It's quite broad.
And give me some examples of some of the people that you've worked with.
So as a consultant, I guess the type of companies, I sort of fell into a bit of a energy-centric silo because of some past experience I had working for a nuclear power company, or somebody was building a nuclear power plant. So yes, worked for oil and gas companies, power companies, more recently companies that are sort of transitioning, that's the right way, away from traditional, did somebody call it the other day? Called it dinosaur juice, oil and gas, into carbon sequestration, carbon capture, and more recently hydrogen production. Yeah, those sort of companies. But also, I think, I've got a bit of a mixed heritage, but, rail companies, transportation, national highways, network rail, those kind of companies.
And what do you think the big challenges facing people carrying out these major projects, these major construction projects are?
I think they sort of underestimate the sheer scale and inertia of them sometimes. I suppose most of the projects I've been involved are what you would call mega projects. So Crossrail, Hinkley Point nuclear power station, they're really big, interesting stuff. And they take a long time. They take a lot of resources. They take a lot of money, a lot of effort. And as such, I think a lot of people can be quite myopic in these projects.
Mm-hmm.
An example I would give you is that I always use the mantra start with the end in mind when it comes to digital things. So without naming the client, I was truly trying to get them to focus on not the capex phase of the project, the engineering and the construction, but the operation, because arguably that's where most of the benefit was going to come. And the metaphor I used was that these people were all in their various divisions and silos were like people on a beach building sandcastles.
Mm-hmm.
And they all wanted to build the best sandcastle there was. And then, it was quite competitive. But I was the guy who was pointing at the sea and saying, can you see that wave on the horizon, the really big one? That's called handover, right? And that's what you should have your eye on, because very, very soon it's going to wash up on the beach and wash away all your lovely sandcastles. So you really ought to be thinking about how you're going to protect them. And the logic of it that was given to me, and this is just the irrationality of things that you experience on these projects, was that they all sort of said, yeah, we can see that wave and we agree with you that it, could wash all that away. But you know what? I'm not going to be here when the wave arrives. Because for a 15-year program, people sort of stay 2-3 years. Now, that might sound like I'm casting very negative aspersions on the individuals concerned. They were very, very good, clever people doing very clever, important stuff. But it was the coordination over time through the life cycle of the project and across disciplines that is really where it started to fall down and does fall down. And I guess the biggest benefit of digital is it sort of breaks those things down. It makes things more transparent, and it means that you can't sort of take those attitudes anymore because the repercussions are become more and more immediate. And I suppose people could view that in two ways. You'd like to think people would view that in a positive way, wouldn't you? But many people feel quite threatened about that. And I think and maybe that's just human psychology around change. So I think that's one of the major things.
And there's an exposure, right, with visibility, because the thing about visibility is that it's transparent to everybody. So that thing that you might have sat on for a couple of days thinking, oh, this will resolve itself, it might then be visible. So sort of there's a change in ways of working to respect the newfound transparency, and I guess react in the right way to the information that you get on a more frequent basis, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the other example I would give is the way that I guess I was brought up through my career working for contractors rather than clients. And then in the latter part of my career, tended to work in clients. And the way that contracting works on those big projects is that the lack of transparency actually works in advantage of the contractor because they make their money out of the unknowns, right? So if a client's putting out a tender package and there's an absence of complete information, well, contractors quite like that, because they can price on that basis and then say, well, you didn't tell us. So, it's a bit like I went to the shop and I bought a shoe and I willingly bought a shoe that had no laces in it, right? And then someone points out, oh, hang on, these shoes haven't got any laces, well, you're going to have to pay more for those laces. Oh, it hasn't got any heels either. Oh, you're going to have to pay more for those heels. So what digital does is it supposedly makes people more invested because it makes it more transparent. There aren't those gaps in knowledge anymore. So hang on a minute, how am I going to make my money? So all those traditional ways of working, it doesn't just affect the point of activity worker. It doesn't just affect the people doing their day-to-day job. It affects the whole fabric of the way that we have traditionally delivered these projects. And change is hard, Helen. It's particularly hard when you deal with people, isn't it? Yeah?
Well, life would be easy, wouldn't it, if it wasn't for all the people?
Yeah. And I think that kind of sucked me in a bit because I always joke I have no hair because I underestimated that people challenge, right? I'm an engineer. I was trained to be an engineer. It's, you work with precise formulas and mathematics and you design to find tolerances. And we know how those things behave, don't we? We know how materials behave. And to an extent, the process side of things, you can engineer behavior through process, but you can't really predict how a human's going to behave. You can have an idea, there's a bit of social science behind it, but once you start getting into those realms as an engineer, you get a bit sniffy, don't you? It's like, social science. It's not even precise. Well, that's not even a science, So if you start talking to engineers about, I don't know, user acceptance or change management, they start switching off. They're like, oh, it's that soft stuff, isn't it? But in my view, Helen, after 30 odd years in the industry, it is the most important thing. You can have the best, most obvious technological solution. You can have the most engineered process. But if you forget the people part and you forget that what you're actually doing is changing the way people work, the clue is change, then you need to manage the people side of change. What's been really nice to see, though, is in the last 10 years, that's being recognised now, which is really, really good. And I've become a little bit of a champion's the wrong word, certainly on my soapbox about it a lot, because despite the progress, I think we've still got a long way to go.
And What's the most common pitfall or mistake that people make around forgetting people?
And they forget to talk to the people that it impacts. It's incredible, isn't it? It's this top-down push rather than creating a a pull from the people who do it. I learned that, trying to think of a good example, but I think it probably was on Crossrail. So one of the things I had to do there was instigate a mobile IT strategy. So basically, we were going to take these field engineers who are out there inspecting quality of work, clipboard. I'm exaggerating slightly. They probably had a digital camera, and they were probably walking, 15 minutes to the point of activity, down a load of hacky stairs, back up again, double handling information. No, we'll just give them an iPad, give them a small iPad mini. Well, on the face of it, if you look at the technological arguments for doing it, reducing information latency, improving productivity and efficiency is a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it, really? But I sort of thought, no, hang on a minute. I think we need to look at it a different way. So I started spending a lot of time in the tunnels with the field engineers. And my boss got so frustrated. I was never at my desk. It's like, where are you? What are you doing? Oh, I'm just spending a day with the engineers. Why are you doing that? Doesn't sound very productive. Well, it was because I was learning the way they worked, and at the same time gaining their trust. I have been a field engineer, so I could at least gain some credibility in their eyes, apart from the fact I had very shiny PPE, which is the way they always judged you. Yeah, you had to put a bit of mud on it before you went out there just to show that you could actually got your hands dirty. But the point I'm making is I spent 6 months with them learning that there were health and safety issues in their minds and perceptions around the technology, that, I know you can't use an iPad because, we could kill somebody by dropping it on somebody's head. Or I had to work through those arguments because actually, is it any more dangerous than them walking around with a piece of paper or a clipboard? Well, we can argue the point, but the fact was that was their perception. So I had to work with the supervisors to understand that they weren't interested in the technology, they were interested in it as a tool. So if you trained them, and they went through a course where they could get a sticker on their hat to say that they could use this device safely. That was one barrier. Another one was to put it in a nice little case that was attached to a lanyard. That meant that if they were climbing ladders, they maintained 3 points of contact as they were going up and down stairs. This meant that you were building reassurance and credibility the whole time. And then I suppose the final lesson I learned in that was that I unfortunately labelled people who I bumped into who probably were quite experienced. I thought, well, maybe they're not going to be interested in technology. They're actually going to be blockers. And I remember one guy took me to one side, Helen, and he said, "What? You're not involving me in this trial?" Because we were trialling them at the time. And I didn't have a good answer, and I sort of hesitated, and he picked up on that. And he said, "It's because you think I'm a Luddite, don't you? You think I don't understand technology." And I went, Yeah. He was much more impolite about this, by the way. He pinned me up against a wall. But the outcome was that I actually thought, I was guilty of that. And what I should have done was tackle that head on, because the irony was he turned into one of the biggest advocates for rolling it out. And actually, he ended up rolling it out on my behalf. So that's the pull, right? So my argument was the 6 months I spent in my boss's eyes, gallivanting around the tunnels, was time well spent, because by the time I took the business case for however many devices to the senior management, they signed it straight away. Why? Because they'd heard all these comments had percolated up that, oh yeah, this Neill, he's a good guy really, and this kind of works. And it wasn't me making the case for it anymore. It was the guys on the site. So that was a huge lesson for me. Like, it's a bit longer, but invest that time to talk to these people. And Helen, you can get great ideas from them. They're the ones doing the job. Yeah. Simple questions like, how could you do your job better? Or how could you design this user interface better? And I bet you're sitting there nodding your head going, yeah, that sounds absolutely a no-brainer. But I tell you what, there are lots of people who don't do that. And then they complain, failed, the implementation failed. It must be the technology. Let's go and get some new technology, because the problem was the technology was fine. It was the way they implemented it that was wrong. And it takes a lot of humility to admit to that sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? And I think it's, these things very rarely fail because the tech's not good. Occasionally, I think there's, connectivity issues and some of those things, fair enough. Or maybe it can't process whatever it needs to process quick enough. But most of the time, the technology does work.
I think you're right. I mean, look, I'm not being glib, Helen, to say that there aren't challenges with technology. Obviously, there are. If you don't get your requirement specification right, you'll end up with a piece of technology that doesn't sort of work.
Mm-hmm.
But and look, I love tech. I'm a geek. That's why I do what I do, right? But if you don't talk to the people and communicate to them and engage with them and explain to them honestly that they're going to be impacted both positively and maybe in the short term negatively, my experience is that honesty does pay off, because what you don't want, like I got and have had, is a load of what I call shin kickers, right? Who don't like you, don't want you there, and will do everything they possibly can, rationally or otherwise, to kick you in the shin. So you spend most of your time going, "Ow, that really hurt." When you should be concentrating on giving them a solution that's actually going to make their job better. So, just don't forget the people. Don't forget the human being. Yeah. They probably know a lot more about their job than you do, right?
Yeah, I had a CTO on, and they were like, "It's not a tech problem; it's a people problem." Was pretty much the whole kind of summary of it, which is interesting, isn't it? Because people can often blame IT and say IT's slow, but that doesn't really bear out. Doing stuff wrong is slow, isn't it? But hard to admit.
Yeah, but funny enough, it's like it's okay to be wrong too, isn't it? This whole fail forward, fail fast thing, which
Yeah.
again, I think this is that seems to have paid off in other industries, hasn't it? Other industries like high tech industries, manufacturing, they seem to have got, unless I'm wrong, they seem to have got past that. But in the industries I look after, which is sort of construction and asset intensive industries, there's still quite an old fashioned conservative attitude, like, oh no, we're different. We're not like aerospace, we're not like shipbuilding. We're different because we work outside in the weather, and you don't understand us. But I don't believe that, Helen, for 1 minute. I think we are very similar, but there's a very, very slow change in attitude, is what I'm saying, compared to other industries.
Do you know what? I think fail fast doesn't play well in lots of organisations. And I think the reason for that is that it's a career question, right? No one sets out to fail. No one wants to put,
What you
I'm
mean?
a big
The word,
failure.
it's the word fail, right? That's what you're saying, culturally.
Yes. But I think also it's a sort of strange attitude to de-risking things, right? Because if you're an engineer, you're used to front end engineering design and you do lots of thinking up front to try and de-risk something.
Yeah.
If you're trying something new, you're not going to learn that by sitting in isolation and doing more thinking and doing more iterations in your office. You're only going to learn that by showing something to someone and getting feedback and admitting that you might be wrong. So it's learning, not failing, if you see what I mean.
You mean reframing it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think learning quickly and cheaply is absolutely what everyone wants to do. And I think that's what, the Amazon mantras are around some of these things, and Google's done lots of them. But failure is a difficult word for people that care about their jobs and their careers. And, you hear, even I've heard a lot of executives try and encourage people to fail by telling their stories of failure. But my reflection always was they weren't really a failure after all. They were like, oh, something went a bit wrong, and they still came out the hero, right? It's not the same as going, actually, we've sunk a large amount of money into this and we were wrong, which is what somehow the Googles, the Netflix managed to do because they value the learning.
I accept your point about the word. I think you're absolutely right. I do think, however, and there are good reasons for it. I mean, if you're working in, as I did, sort of capex and construction, the margins are wafer thin. You can't afford to fail big.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can't afford to fail small. But yes, by reframing it, I mean, I always think it's interesting if you look at academia, if this is a fair comparison, so, shout me down if I'm wrong here, but
Mm-hmm.
the whole premise of academic method and learning is accepting that you could spend 4 years on a thesis and be wrong. And that would be considered adding to learn knowledge, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are probably some academics out there frothing at the mouth hearing me say that, saying, get really upset by the fact that somebody proved them wrong. But the premise of academic learning is that, isn't it? It's
Mm-hmm.
precisely that. And I was going to get this wrong, but it's the Thomas Edison light bulb famous quote. He didn't come up with one way to invent a light bulb. He came up with 100 ways. I'm probably going to get that wrong. Not to, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in an academic world, that's valued. Yet in the world of industry, oh no, like you said, oh, if I failed and lose my job, I can't have that attached to my CV, can I? I could have to do it another way. So I do take that, but I do see now not the pure fail forward, fail fast, but one of the things I have learned, I call it like the staircase method, is that when we were, and this happened at Crossrail when we were applying new technologies, where perhaps we didn't have the budget in the early days and we were starting late. I remember we were doing some work around 4D modeling, and we thought, okay, that could be quite expensive employing a load of 4D modelers for no particular effect. So we went around some of the early stations and we were looking for use cases. We were just looking for problems that 4D could solve. And one of them on one particular site was modeling getting stuff underground in the future. So they wanted to know what the station looked like in a year's time so that they could plot logistics around laydown for GRC panels and how you get it down through a very tight mole hole space to plan it. And we thought, that sounds like a 4D use case. Well, let's just take some existing, very simple programmatic information and some very simple models and levels of detail. We'll invest a certain amount of money to get one guy just to knock up a very simple model. We'll take it back to the site. We'll put it on a video screen. And we blew their socks off. They were like, wow, what's this? Yeah, this is your station in a year's time. Is it? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Oh, look, we've modeled it. Oh, that's a little panel going down there. Wow, this is great. It was interesting, the body language, Helen, because they went from being like this to sitting forward, and you just thought, oh, okay. And then we said, well, do you want some of this? Would you be prepared to pay for some of this out of the project budget? Oh, yeah, definitely. Simple, obvious. So we thought, oh, well, we can do it for one station. You can do it for all of them. And when you did the maths and you scaled it up, you were talking about millions of pounds being saved from the contingency because you knew something you didn't know. And now you could say, well, that's not really saving money, Neill. It's just moving money around. But we could then go to the exec and say, this technology thing that you're a bit skeptical about, well, look, it works. It's worked here at this station, and it could possibly work across these stations if you think we're approximately right, then we're talking about millions of pounds. Can we have a little bit of that saving, please, to scale up in other areas? It's not really fail forward, fail fast. It's sort of moving slowly, more cautiously, more carefully, building your credibility over time so that you can do more and more and more and more with it. So you're always sure-footed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think the really smart thing about that is you are delivering benefits at every step on your staircase, right? It's not a trust us, we'll go away for a couple of years, we'll come back and we'll deliver said business case. It's actually you're almost like self-funding then, aren't you? And you're demonstrating the value in the way you deploy it. And I think that careful thought about how you find those increments is really undervalued. So there's an art in there as well as a science to it, but I think that's really undervalued in digital transformations. Finding the right stepping stones is well worth some careful thought, I think.
Well, I'm sure you've had this, Helen, so that, part of what we do to get clients excited and wanting to work with us is that we sell that rainbows and unicorns, art of the possible view of the future.
Mm-hmm.
I've met very, very few clients when you sit down and show them the potential of, I don't know, digital twin, smart analytics, AI, predictive maintenance. I mean, who's going to sit there and go, "Oh, I don't want that"? But you get all this really, really positive signals at the table. Yeah, this is really good. Yeah, we want to go there. But the art is that you've got to then turn round and tell them, in order to have that, A, it's going to take a long time. B, it's going to cost a lot of money. And C, in the early stages, is not really going to be that sexy, because you're having to then tell them things like, well, you're just going to have to, your information's not in a good place, it's poor quality. And then you notice the body language in the room, there's furrowed brows and almost they're asking you to get out,
Yeah.
So what you've got to sell them then is the journey. And the journey has to be, to my earlier point, sure-footed, right? Look, this isn't an impossible journey. It is entirely possible. We can get you there, or you can get yourself there, but we've got to start with something, because they'll always say, "Oh, what do we do in the next 3 months?" And you're not going to turn around and say, "Well, give me £1 million, please, so we can cleanse your data." We're not going to do that, are they? You're going to find a use case commensurate with where they are that addresses a real problem, a real challenge, and spend a little bit of money and demonstrate that return. And then you can go back to them, can't you, in a few months and say, "Are you still excited about this journey?" Yeah. Well, I can give you some data, something you can hold in your hand. So I've been asked that before, don't give me grains of sand, Neill, that just fall through my fingers. Give me something. Yeah. And that's the skill, isn't it?
Yeah.
To present that and find out what that is.
Yeah. Because when you do it wrong, it looks the same, right? It looks like you're doing this project, this pilot kind of early stage implementation. But unfortunately, you're doing it in an area that no one cares about. And that's why they've let you do it, because no one cares if you mess it up, right? But that doesn't help you scale anything. What helps you scale is, as you said, like a problem that they really care about solving. And that's the difference, I think, because that's where the learning comes from. And also that's where the confidence comes from to carry on what is ultimately a journey that involves difficult data or complex issues or everything else.
I think it's a real problem because, I don't know, some people say I'm getting cynical in my old age. I just still think I'm a pragmatic realist, is that, I'm as passionate as anyone about the new technologies that are emerging, right? And we apply acronyms to them and we come up with buzzwords, whether it's BIM, digital twins, AI, you name it. I'll come up with about 10 of them. The problem is that I can see a weariness in the industry of all these technologies being brought, but no evidence that it's actually turning the dial. Now, I think it is. It's happening slowly, but it's a combination of we're not publicising that, we're not documenting it, because they're small things. They may not be particularly sexy things, but they're there. Coupled with the approaches I think we take sometimes in consultancy, we're as guilty of as anybody in taking that measured approach, winding back, being pragmatic. That does not detract from the potential. It does not detract. But what worries me, Helen, is that if we allow this to continue, the opportunity goes, because the perception changes, and perception is everything. And if the perception is that there's a load of charlatan consultants out there selling snake oil, then we're going to get nowhere, are we? So we need to do this properly and in a measured way.
Yeah, and there's a balance there, isn't there? You've got to think big whilst acting small. And it goes back to what you said right at the start, is start with the end in mind, right? You make some slightly different choices if you've got the end in mind. And going back to what you said earlier, you alluded to being a contractor and having different wants and needs than if you're the owner-operator. And owner-operators are there, they're not experts on this technology yet. They want to start with the end in mind, but perhaps they don't know what that looks and feels like. So how does an owner-operator work with a contractor so that they don't just get the physical asset, they get the digital asset as well?
So I will answer that question, but I just wanted to draw attention to something else I find very interesting, is that it should be, in all these cases with new technology, it should be owner driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're the ultimate benefiter of
Mm-hmm.
that. But what we have seen, or I have seen, is technology's driven bottom up. No, it's being driven by the vendor or the contractor. So how many times have I been in a meeting where I've represented the owner operator and a contractor's come in and said, I've got this really, let's think of a good example. So when I worked at Hinkley Point in the early civil engineering days, we had a contractor there who had some really, really expensive earth moving equipment. I'm being very glib about this, but grading equipment, which had amazing technology that could work out where the equipment was, the angle of the grader blade, and essentially how much material was being cut and filled from the ground, right? So came into the meeting with all this amazing data and said, do you want this? And we were like, well, this is brilliant, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could probably use that information. And the contractor said, okay, I'm going to name my price.
Yeah.
The point I'm making to get round to answering your question is that everyone talks about intelligent clients. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of presupposes that the owner needs to be savvy about the
Mm-hmm.
technology, needs to go and understand it on their terms and how it will benefit them. And you also need to be assertive. So in that room, if we just change that situation around, if we knew from the beginning that we needed that data, we could have asked for it and set the price for it, right? I think that's part of the answer. But you can't just go around and say to owners, well, you've just got to clue up, guys. I think you've got to create a sense of investment, right? Now in part that has been solved by new contracts like NEC3, NEC4.
Mm-hmm.
So Crossrail was NEC3 that tried to tie in all the parties to one common goal. Like we live and die together, right? If I fail, you fail, and we're all going to suffer the consequences. Now, NEC3 as a form of contract did sort of solve that. It would do things like saying when we've got a problem, we must all use our best endeavours to solve it, right? No blame, we just solve it.
Yeah.
However, all that does is it kicks the commercial football down the road, right? So 10 years later, you've got a great product, hopefully on time. But you ask the difference between the final account on the contractor's perspective and the client, and then you get back into you're just delaying the blame game. And funny enough, I've experienced contractual models like frameworks. A long, long time ago, I think we worked on one when I was with a civil engineering company for the EA. The name escapes me, but it really was a way of saying we take all our hats off, right? We're all in this together. We all work to a target cost. We all work to a target program. And if one of us makes a mistake, whoever it is, we all suffer. So therefore, we're all motivated to make it right. So I think it's a combination of owners getting smarter, contractual mechanisms working better, both carrot and stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
To break some of these old established ways of working in contracting, because those old habits genuinely die hard. But you've also got to think from the contractor's point of view, how are they going to make their money if they're not making it out of change orders, right? How do you reward them for that good behaviour?
Yeah, because there has to be something in it for everybody. All boats need to rise, right? It can't just be we're gonna take this cost away from you, which by the way is your margin. And I think that's hard in an adversarial procurement lens.
And I think Crossrail did try its damnedest to try and cultivate that all ships rise together type thing. So one of my roles was to act as this bridge between the supply chain and the client. So the client had all these wonderful new technical requirements drawn out of BIM, and some of them were contractually embedded and many weren't. And the job was for us to enable that. So for example, maybe there was a contract change. So I remember one, I think we changed the level of detail for 3D modeling. I don't know. So you can only model pipes down to sort of 60 millimeter nominal bore because, Why would you want to do it any more than that? Anyway, this huge addendum to the contract came out, and it was published. And as a traditional client, you just think, well, I've got a capable supply chain. They're going to understand everything that we've said, and now we expect them to deliver. But we were actually going around the sites going, oh, did you get Appendix J of the contract amendments? And yes. When did you get them? Oh, about 4 weeks ago. What did you do with them? Oh, we just gave them to our tier 2. Did you read them beforehand? No. Okay. So you could either get very angry as a client at that point, and many did, or you could say, deep breath, I've produced an FAQ here. You're supposed to say, well, look, I'm contractually obliged to say that, as a competent contractor, you're supposed to have read it. But evidently you haven't. So I'm going to help you now. I'm going to break down this really complicated document into 10 things we now expect you to do. And then we're going to bring you into an academy building, and we're going to talk to you about it, and we're going to allow you to ask us questions, right? You might say, well, that's just leading a horse to water, So, but those sorts of methods did work. And then there was benchmarking where you could, I'm going to call it naming and shaming it. Really, it was like league tables. It's like who's conforming to contractual conditions, who's going above and beyond, right? Who's doing sort of things that we didn't expect them to do, but they're doing it and can demonstrate value to the project. Let's, write a really good news story about them, or although it's anonymized, let's put it up on a wall just to drive different behaviors. And that, so I think Crossrail had the elements of the secret sauce, right? Didn't quite get it 100% right. So I'm hoping, and I'm seeing actually, to be fair, projects like Tideway and things like that, which seems to be under the radar compared to High Speed 2 and other ones. Maybe it's the nature of what they're building, I don't know. Are putting all those things together, and we're starting to see slowly some changes in behavior. So really intelligent clients, invested supply chains, better relationships, better motivation for wanting to do the things the right way.
And done the right way, it becomes a differentiator, right, for a contractor?
I think so, because, the behaviors we used to get is if a contractor A was not getting the limelight, they'd come and talk to you privately and go, how come contractor, B over there is getting all the... We say, well, if you come and talk to us, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can be right next to them if you want. And it's funny how a little bit of simple psychology like that often works.
Yeah. Oh, because people like praise on the simplest level.
They do.
And do you know, it's so easy to recognise people for doing a good job. It's so
funny
easy.
Though, Helen, that we're sitting here talking about it, and I'm sure some of it is true. Yet still, some of the traditional practices which I've talked about are still going on, and I do find that frustrating.
I did literally hear a couple of days ago, going to your example of not just a contractor but a projects team going back to their asset management function and saying, we've got all this amazing data from these earthworks and from these 4D models, and they're like, I think we can just have a PDF, can't we?
Let me ask you this question. I completely agree. It's funny because oil and gas is an interesting industry. So when the oil price goes up, there seems to be quite a lot of surplus money around. So what's the point I'm making? Some industries are quite happy to pay for and suffer the consequences of waste associated with, I don't know, poor information or capturing information and then rescanning. You can give lots of different examples, but my logic was always, surely they would want to not waste that money, wouldn't they? Yet, when there's lots of money sloshing around, it's almost like there's a premium attached, to, well, we're going to waste it anyway, and it's 8% of the contract sum, and that's just the way the industry works, and we'll just accept it as if it is. Am I being a little bit harsh?
Yeah, I don't think it ever felt like that to me, being in the oil industry. But then I was always a downstream person where the margins are thinner.
Yeah.
I think perhaps in upstream, people felt like they could print money in the early days, and they only started worrying about efficiency when it came towards later in life, when it was more difficult. But I think there is a balance there. I think big oil is quite good at knowing that they need to invest in technology. They're not always the best at executing against the strategy. And I think that's where the waste comes from, is probably not doing well on implementation rather than it being frivolous or thinking, oh, we can just spend this money. And I think, it's complicated and busy people haven't spent enough time understanding the technology at a leadership level, and people on the ground haven't been immersed enough to help shape it. So I
Yeah,
think it's quite similar to the things you say, but I think every so many years the cost cull comes round, and some poorly implemented but actually very good technologies get culled, and that doesn't work here, and that all feels really familiar to me.
yeah, I was probably a little unfair to call out a particular industry or sector. I think my point was I have experienced clients who would appear to me to be happy to pay for that waste, right? And that
Yeah.
and I'm sort of, maybe I'm being naive. It's just sort of, and I have been guilty of that in the past. It's just like, why would you not want? Why would you want to continue doing that? It's almost if there was an acceptance of that didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think some of it is silos, to go back to things you said earlier. So, there are these silos, and people are in a technology silo. They're not linked to the day-to-day P&L, and therefore they see it more as a budget to be spent than a cost that is rolled up in the bottom line. So when you talked about Crossrail, you were very much like, are we diverting this piece of our overall budget to deliver this thing? That's a very clear commercial choice there. And I think big organizations can sometimes suffer from silos and getting a bit divorced from that. This rolls up into the cost somewhere. So, yeah, the more you kind of disconnect your technology teams or your innovation teams from the front line, the more likely those things are to happen.
Yeah, I think the example we're citing here is something that has really drawn me in and excited me of late. It's that whole, so we've just described a behavior that appears to me to be irrational.
Hmm.
I'm really interested in getting under the skin of those things. In other words, there must be an answer somewhere. There must be a rational answer why. And in most cases, there is. Yeah,
All behavior makes sense to the person doing it.
sure. But if you understand it on their terms, right, even though you can't quite understand it, then you've got something you can start to work with. You've got something you can start to address. So the siloing that you talk about, I've seen that manifest in different ways in different organizations, where one company I worked for actively cultivated competitiveness between silos. So you could have a piece of innovation in one silo of the business, and logically you'd think, oh, well, surely they'd want to share it with the rest of the business, wouldn't they? So that we can scale it across the business. No, they keep it to themselves, get in a meeting, suddenly announce that they're doing this wonderful thing because it makes them look good, right? And it's made their figures good and better than the other individual in the table. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that I don't understand that, right? I wouldn't, I don't think, behave that way. But when you dug under the surface, why were these people behaving like this? Not because actually in many cases they thought it was the right thing to do. It was because the metrics by which they were measured, right, encouraged it, so that the higher strategic view of the organization cultivated this competitiveness. They were just conforming, right? So you could go and try and address that at their silo level, but you'd be unlikely to succeed, because they'd just say something like, yeah, great idea, Neill, love what you're doing, but you know what, I'm going to ignore you because ultimately I am rewarded for behavior X.
I always used to call it the race to be second. That's a great idea. We'd love to do it. When you've made it work somewhere else, come back to us, and we'll be second to implement it because we want the benefits, but we don't want any of the risk.
I think I was in a meeting once. I think it might have been the same company, or was it a client? And the chief exec was at the head of the table, and he was really setting the tone. And he was like, "Yeah, we're going to do this digital transformation project, And it was everybody around the table was nodding their heads, making the right noises. And at the end of it, he said, right, Neill, go and do it then. I thought, great, everybody's aligned. This is brilliant. 5 weeks later, nothing happened. I was getting no support, no resources, blocked at every opportunity. And also I was getting beaten up by the CEO saying, why aren't you moving fast enough? This feels really uncomfortable. And when I tackled all of these guys, he said precisely that. He just said, I support what you're doing, Neill. It's brilliant. But I'm not going to do it because every month I go into a meeting and get bashed over the head about my figures. And that's causing me the most pain. I was just like, oh God, light bulb moment, absolutely right, and never take that for granted in a meeting. The fact that what I observed and drew conclusion was completely wrong.
Yeah. So this brings me on to my final question. What's one lesson you learnt the hard way earlier on that you wish someone had just tapped you on the shoulder and told you?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, we were talking about failure before, and actually what I've described to you is a series of what I probably describe to myself as failures, but they've made me much, much stronger, right? So I could give you many, and I've probably given you some during the course of this conversation. But one I learned the hard way was I bit off more than I can chew. I tried to do. It was one particular project, big digital transformation program. I'd learned a lot from Crossrail and places like that. I was supremely confident about what needed to be done, and I designed the whole package, the whole thing, right? And I spent months polishing it, crafting it, to go and ask for a considerable amount of money, Helen, right? And sure enough, I didn't get the money. And it wasn't because it wasn't a really well thought out and designed piece of change. And it wasn't just my idea, it was lots of people's ideas. But it was just giving the company indigestion, right? It was just too big to swallow. It was too much change. I'd forgotten the lesson of incremental change, of go and pick something. And ironically, there were people in my team doing precisely that. And I, for whatever reason, got completely sidetracked by it. So, and it was like a real, this, Neill, this is a kick up the backside. You knew it worked and that was really painful, Helen. And by God, I won't do that again.
Yeah. And sometimes I think people listening to the podcast need to be reminded of things they already know. It's not about just telling them things that are a different way of looking at things. It's, sometimes we need to learn these lessons a couple of times.
Yes. Although they do say, to make one mistake is fine, but to make the same mistake twice, that's really frowned on. But I think we do. And sometimes you need to, just to reinforce what you already knew. So no shame in that, eh?
No shame in that at all. Thank you so much, Neill. Good to chat to you, as always.
My great pleasure, Helen. Thank you.
And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do
that? Find me on LinkedIn. I'm incessantly chatting about something over there, so engage with my comments or send me a message. I'm always delighted to have these kinds of conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Innovation Crowd. Subscribe on your favourite podcasting service so you don't miss a thing. And I'll see you next time.